I'm June Blotnick, the Executive Director of Clean Air and Sea, and I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in this series. Today is session 5, and it's on power plants, cost versus benefits. And we're so grateful to have our energy expert with us again today, Nancy LaPlaca, and she will be reviewing the slides with you again today. And I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Thanks so much, June. And thank you also to the Sierra Club for hosting this. And thank you all for signing up and for being willing to learn yet more complicated information. I'm still on slide 1 here, Andrew. So slide 2, please use the chat box to ask questions. We'll stop about every 15 minutes to answer them. The recording, the PowerPoints with the speaker's notes will all be available online for anyone to access and download. And we want this series to work for you. And I've been very gratified to get a lot of great questions, people emailing me, asking to talk about their particular situation. So please keep that up. This is how we're going to change things, because enough of us are going to understand how this complicated system works. So slide 3, again, we're on session 5 today, and we're going to be talking about power plants. And again, we're only going to teach this one today at noon, from noon to 1:15, and then the recording will be posted. Our next session, which is on Tuesday, December 14th, is going to get into the specifics of the costs of clean energy. Today, we're just going to just take a glancing look at it. We're mostly going to focus on power plants. So slide 4. Here's our agenda. I'm going to be talking about power plants because really, if you're not an engineer and you never really thought about power plants, it's a difficult world to understand. And I want to talk about these in a way that allows you to compare apples to oranges. How do I compare something like a coal plant with a natural gas plant? How do I look at various types of natural gas plants? And then one of the most important issues that we can see that's really important lately is fuel costs. And the reason why is because those fuel costs are increasing so rapidly right now. And in fact, natural gas has doubled in the last 6 months. It's doubled. And when you've got integrated resource plans that depend so heavily on these fossil fuels, these costs really make a difference, because especially in natural gas, fossil gas plants, fuel is often 70% of the total cost to run the plant. And then we're going to dive a little bit into O&M costs, operation and maintenance costs. Why are they high for some types of power plants and low for some? And then why is it important, particularly right now, to understand the basics of these natural gas plants? And then what's LCOE, levelized cost of electricity? What does it mean? And how can we compare the different LCOEs for different types of generation? Then we're going to take a look at North Carolina's electricity mix and take a brief look at Duke's resource plan and how that fits in. So slide 5 here. Let's start out. I want to give you a brief overview again of the US electricity mix compared to North Carolina's, and remind folks that this is a system that's been around for a long time. Electricity has been around for 130 years. The first power plants were built in the 1880s in New York, and Grover Cleveland was president. Our regulatory model is almost 100 years old, was developed in the 1920s. The power plants that we run today were designed in the 1950s, when I was born, and when Eisenhower was president, and those power plants have basically not changed. The average age of our power plants is very high, especially here in North Carolina, because we were an early state to build coal plants. So our coal plants, some of ours were literally built in the late 1920s. And I want to remind people too that some of these nuclear power plants have licenses to run for 80 years. And so that is going to affect Duke Energy's electricity mix going forward. So slide 6, I've shown this before. This is the US electricity mix. You can see that coal is way down from its high of 50% about 12 years ago. Fossil gas is way up from a few percent 20 years ago to 40%. Nuclear has always stayed the same. Wind, we're at about 10%. Solar around the country, this says 2.3, but when you take into account small solar, we're actually at more like 3.3 or 3.5. Slide 7. I love this slide from the EIA, the US Energy Information Administration, a wonderful website if you want to go dig around. And basically what this shows us is, look how fast coal crashed. So basically we went from a country that was 50% coal down to 20% coal in really a very few short years. Natural gas took longer to ramp up, but unfortunately, most of the coal megawatt hours have been replaced by natural gas megawatt hours. So slide 8 here. Let's talk about something most people don't realize, and I know it was a shock to me when I started looking at power plants. Slide 8, power plants and water use. Now slide 9. The Union of Concerned Scientists has done a lot of work on this, and this is from John Rogers, who's one of their campaign leads, who has written a lot about power plants and water use. And there's a link to his blogs. And slide 10 here shows something that is not very intuitive. And that is that when it comes to water withdrawal, now withdrawal, not consumption, thermoelectric power plants at certain times in this country's history, like until very recently, withdrew more water than agriculture. However, agriculture consumes the water that it withdraws, right? Whereas thermoelectric power plants, most of them in this country have cooling where you recycle the cooling. Some of them have once through, which means they take that cooling water and they dump it. But more and more power plants have recycled water. However, just because that water is recycled doesn't mean that it's not full of contaminants. And I'm not going to get into that in depth, but that is certainly something that people should be aware of, especially if you live near a power plant. So slide 11 is specific to the southeastern United States. And because our power plants in North Carolina are not on the coast, I think we have one nuclear plant on the coast near Wilmington, but most of ours are on rivers, right? And so most of the water that we use in North Carolina for power plants comes from our rivers. And so you can see that a stunning amount of our fresh water withdrawals are thermoelectric power plants. Now, when this was written, when this study happened, it may be lower than 66% right now. I'm not sure, but it's certainly close. And you could see that public supply is relatively small, 14%. That's how much water we all use that comes from our city water agencies, so that we can, take showers and run our dishwasher and home use. Okay, slide 12. This slide shows water use by power plant. And as you can see, nuclear is very high. Coal is high also. Gas is less, but nuclear and coal are very high. And to explain why this is difficult, let's first hit coal. Coal has so many contaminants that the water that they use, the produced water, the water that the coal plant uses, is called a blowdown. And the blowdown, which goes through the various pollution control devices, is full of contaminants. It's just chock full of contaminants. I'm not going to go much into that either, but if people are interested in it, let me know and I can send you some helpful links. So slide 13 I put in here because this is a big risk, not just in North Carolina, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And there have been certain times in France, which has a huge nuclear fleet, where they had to shut down their nuclear plants because of a lack of water, or because the water that came from the nuclear plant was so hot that it was in danger of raising the temperature of the body of water that it was getting dumped into so much that rules would shut it down. Now, if you Google nuclear plant shutdown and North Carolina or Florida, you will see that this has happened in North Carolina and in Florida in the last decade. So slide 14, I want to bring up another issue with water, and that is drought. And so you can see on the right, you see that sort of S curve, so that hydro generation in the Western United States has been off and on because of the lack of water. So if you have a hydropower plant, you need water. And if you don't have water, you can't run the hydropower plant. So far, Lake Mead, which is the largest water reservoir in the country, which until the drought lowered the level of Lake Mead, powered 2,200 megawatts of hydro, is now down to about 1,500 megawatts of hydro. And that's even with changing out the turbines so that the turbines can deal with a shorter head. And that's what they call the depth of the water in the reservoir. And that depth of water, the weight of the water, helps to drive the turbine. So when you have less water, you have less weight, and the turbine doesn't run as efficiently and produce as much energy. So let's hit slide 15 here. And actually, this is a good place to stop. Kathy, do we have any questions?
Not yet, Nancy.
Okay, all right, well then power on here. So powering on, slide 15, we're gonna look at power plants here. And let's go to slide 16. I promise this is about the most complicated we're gonna look at. And the link to this, which is from Penn State, from their an online course they have in energy, is a good chart that shows a few things that we are all going to be concerned with going forward, all of us who want to replace fossil fuels with clean energy. So if you see on the left, the x-axis going up from lower to higher says operating costs. And on the bottom, it says operational flexibility, less to more. So let's start with the top right, simple cycle gas turbines. Now, they're up here with, they're very highly flexible, very high, far to the right on flexibility. They're also very high cost. Why? Because of fuel. Because a simple cycle gas turbine, which is also called a peaker, which is also called a combustion turbine, a CT, they use a lot of fuel. It's a same as a jet engine. It's bolted to concrete. And so that's why it uses a lot of fuel. It uses a lot of fuel because it's very highly flexible. It turns on immediately. But the trade-off is that it's very expensive and it uses a lot of fuel. So you'll see combined cycle gas turbines are in the middle, and so is coal. And that's because the operating costs and the operational flexibility are sort of medium. And we'll get into that more detail in the next slide. And then you see in the bottom left, you have that nuclear and coal have low operating costs. And that's really because the power plants are so giant and they generate so much power. You don't really need a lot of people to run them. Now, nuclear needs a lot more safety issues, of course, than coal, but coal is very dirty. And so the operating costs are, operating costs for coal are going up and up. So let's go to the next slide, which is from the same article. And basically, I wanted to use it to explain two important concepts: runtime and ramp time. So runtime means how many hours in the year is it going to run? Are there constraints to the runtime? And the ramp time is going to be particularly important going forward, because the ramp time is how fast does this power plant ramp up? How much time does it take? And this is where it's particularly important for batteries. And so what we've been seeing in the world of batteries is that there are different time periods that we need batteries for. And there also are characteristics in a battery that how fast does it come online? And basically, batteries have very fast ramp times. What's important and critical for batteries, and we'll dive into that more in the next session, the 6th session, is you want the runtime to be long. So you know your batteries are going to ramp up fast, but you want to make sure they're going to run long enough to actually help us with running giant power plants or, producing large amounts of energy. So let's look at the technology list here. Simple cycle combustion turbine, that's a peaker. Ramp time, minutes to hours, they come on right away. That's why the utilities use so many of them. That's why there are so many on standby. So the minimum runtime is minutes. The utilities know that these power plants are expensive to run. And really, simple cycle combustion turbines, in other words, peakers, they basically are designed to run for 1% to 5% of the hours in a year. That's not very much. And frankly, that's why batteries and solar plus batteries are beating peakers. They're beating them first in the places where you've got very low cost renewables and where you have rules that allow batteries to be compensated. Again, we'll get into more depth in that in the next session. So let's look at the second one, combined cycle combustion turbine. That just means a combustion turbine with another cycle wrapped around it, or they call it a HRSG, and that's a heat generating unit. Anyway, it captures the waste heat. But you'll notice that the ramp time is hours. So if the utility needs power right away, it's not going to work. And the minimum runtime is hours to days. Now, nuclear is interesting because, look, it takes days to ramp up that plant. And the minimum runtime is week to months. And this is a weakness of nuclear plants. If it doesn't run enough hours, it is not cost competitive. So what we're seeing in other states, not really here yet, is that nuclear plants in deregulated states, they cost more than wind and energy efficiency. And so those plants are having a hard time paying for themselves. Now that will eventually happen everywhere, but right now it's just happening in deregulated states, and we're a regulated state. So let's look at wind turbines. Ramp time is minutes. Minimum runtime, let them run as much as they can. And the same with hydro. Hydro, and this is where we're lucky in North Carolina. We have a lot of hydro, not just in North Carolina, but in South Carolina and East Tennessee. And so we have, through hydro, those resources that can respond immediately so that we can add more renewables. Okay, slide 18. And I put this in here in 2 places because I want to emphasize to folks that battery storage is now 30% cheaper than gas peaker plants for firming renewables. Now, this is in Australia, but this article is relevant, is relative to Australia, but it's also happening in this country. And again, if you think about it, it makes sense. Where is battery storage going to be cheaper than gas peaker plants first? Well, places that have low cost renewables and places that have rules that allow battery storage to compete economically with power plants. Because if there's one area of regulation that needs good rules, it's battery storage. That is where we need good rules that allow us to pair batteries with solar in North Carolina so that we can start shutting down some of these old dirty peakers. And again, what I like about this article here, and I cut and pasted this, and there's the link, is that what they're looking at in this paper is the cost of energy delivered by a new 250 megawatt gas peaker, and they're comparing it to 250 megawatt 4-hour battery and a 250 megawatt 2-hour battery. So we'll look at that in more depth later. So going to slide 19, this is also a good place to stop. Do we have any questions, Kathy?
Yes, we do. On the chart regarding operating cost versus flexibility,
Yeah,
you show coal twice. Why?
let's see.
I think it was slide 16.
Slide 16. You know why I would say? That's because the cost of coal plants has changed so dramatically. I mean, it's hard to express this almost. And the reason why is because of advocates. Really, it's because of people like you and me and all of us. So that basically what happened to coal plants is no one looked at anything. Oh, pollution, what pollution? Oh, polluted water, what polluted water, And so basically we have gone from a system that I would say prior to 2012 only looked at the cost to generate a coal kilowatt hour. So that's why the operating costs would be low. Then we started taking into account all of these costs, and all of these rules started kicking in from the Clean Air Act, like the mercury rule. And people had to put flue gas desulfurization and all kinds of pollution control devices on these old power plants, these old coal plants. And that drove the cost of coal from 3 cents a kilowatt hour, basically to 5 and 6 and 7. And that is why we should be shutting down all of this coal in the country, in our country. So any other questions, Kathy?
Yeah, that explains the difference in the two coal costs, but how come there's a change in flexibility?
Well, I would say that that comes from the fact that if you run a coal plant for, let's just say, less than 40% of the hours, and I'm kind of guessing on this, I'm not exactly sure what the capacity factor is for coal, that's the crossover point. But once you don't run a coal plant X% of the hours in a year, let's just say 40, it's just not economic. So the operating costs get higher. So we're going to get more into this, Kathy, in our coal section. So let's go to 19, Andrew, if you're not already there, and then move to 20. So if I don't answer your question, Kathy, ask me again. Okay, so slide 20 on coal plants. I put a lot of verbiage here because I want people to understand coal plants in this country, because we have shut down a third of them, but we still have 2/3 to go. And the average age of a coal plant is about 35 to 40 years. And what industry is mostly doing is shutting down the old ones first. But here's where what they're doing in North Carolina is not that. In fact, it's much worse. It's terrible. What they're doing, Duke Energy, is they're taking these very, very old coal plants and they're converting them to natural gas. And so they're very inefficient. And so whereas most states, they're shutting down these very old coal plants, unfortunately here in North Carolina, we've taken a lot of those very old dirty coal plants and converted them to natural gas. So again, my point here is we have shut down a third of the US coal plants, but we still have to shut the rest down. And if we are serious about climate change, there is no reason to run them. And again, something that just really just gobsmacks me, especially with all of the new advocates that are out there and the interactions I've had with so many wonderful, young, dynamic advocates that are in North Carolina, is it just hits me in the face. All these decades, we have ignored these staggering health and environmental costs. It's been ignored by utilities, it's been ignored by regulators, and that has to stop. And also, if we had a price on CO2, it would shut coal down immediately. No wonder why they never passed the carbon costs, because basically it would have shut down coal immediately. Because if you have coal that used to cost 3 cents, then you add in all these rules, mercury and and other pollution control rules from the Clean Air Act. Well, then you add like 2-3 cents, right? Well, then if you have a carbon cost and you add another cent or 2 cents, forget it. coal is up to 8 cents and it's over. So honestly, that's why they've been fighting this so hard. So let's go to slide 21. And this is something that we all, I think, have to be aware of. This year, in 2021 and in 2020, coal use went up, okay? Here we go. Coal bucks a 15-year decline in the US with a 22% increase. That's because the cost of natural gas has doubled, right? From about $2 a million BTU, 2 to 250, to about $5.50 a million BTU. And so what are the utilities doing? They're turning to coal. Now, here's where I want to mention what Germany does. Germany has rules that they actually stole from a US law called PURPA, the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act of 1978. And what they said in the German rules was, they said, if you have clean energy, you must dispatch it first. We have terrible rules in this country that the regulators could change. The regulators could change this. That says, if you have clean energy, it must go to the top of the dispatch list. And so what that means is that you don't let utilities dump clean energy. What I saw in Arizona, which is a tragedy, is that utilities are dumping solar and burning coal. They're still doing that. Why? Because they make more money from coal. And that is unconscionable, but that's what they do because the rules let them do it and the regulators let them get away with it. So we're going to go into more detail in Germany on the next one too, but the German rules, which are very simple, there's only 3 of them. Basically, if we could get those 3 simple things, our market would change basically overnight in this country. So let's go to slide 22 here. And I love this article here that's just from about 6 months ago or so. And basically, you've got the CEO of one of the largest utilities in the country talking about how much coal costs. So let's go to slide 23, please, Andrew. And basically, what he says is there's not a regulated coal plant in the country that's economic today. Now, I highlighted this word regulated because we're a regulated state. And I noticed in the IRP, the order that came out just a few days ago. And speak up, Joel, if you have anything to add, because I know you read it, and I'm sure a couple other people have read it too. That basically they're going to finally look at the cost of coal, and a number of commenters, including I believe it was SACE and the Sierra Club, said, hey, look, Duke Energy in North Carolina, you're just not being transparent enough. You're not showing us the numbers of what it costs to run those coal plants, okay? And so let's go to the next slide, 24, because here's what the CEO says of NextEra, this giant utility, is he says many of the remaining coal plants can keep operating because they're in states or regions with regulatory systems that force consumers to cover the costs, right? And so that's why they're running them. I mean, I watched this in Arizona for the last 10 years, 15 years. It's heartbreaking. You see that these utilities, even though they could buy solar that's cheaper, they don't. They run coal. So let's go, excuse me, to slide 25. Sorry, I need some water. Thank you. So look at what the CEO of NextEra says. He doesn't name the states, but the writer of the article from Inside Climate does. And it's basically includes North Carolina. As I will show you in the next couple slides, let's go to slide 26, Andrew. This is a study that's now 2 years old, 2.5 years old. And basically, again, what we're talking about is a crossover, right? It's a crossover. At what point does coal become more expensive than local wind and solar? And if we don't have an open, transparent process where everyone can look at the assumptions and weigh in on them, we just have to buy whatever Duke Energy tells us. And unfortunately, that's how it's been for a very long time. 10 years with no evidentiary hearings it's a tragedy, really. It's a tragedy. So let's go to slide 27, because I first saw this on a Twitter feed of Tyler Norris, who get on Tyler's Twitter feed if you want to really follow what's going on in North Carolina and South Carolina. And basically he took this and posted it to his Twitter feed. And it's from the study that's in the previous slide by VCE and Energy Innovation. And they analyzed all these coal plants across the United States. And they came up with this chart. And this chart in the dark red says what coal plants in this state, the specified state, all the states are along the bottom there. I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to read. Which states have the most at-risk coal? We're number one. North Carolina, number one. What's number two? Florida, the Sunshine State. So what the dark pink, the dark red, and the lighter red is coal at risk in 2018, which is now 3 years behind us, and coal at risk in 2025. So this is probably newer, more efficient coal. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it runs more hours in a year. I'd have to go look. For example, why are so many of their power plants going to be uneconomic in 2025? Again, all this stuff is detailed, but look at North Carolina. It just slaps you in the face. And then if we go to slide 28, Bloomberg New Energy Finance also looked at this, and this is a map from them. Again, you can see all of this uneconomic coal in North and South Carolina, 15 gigawatts. That's 15,000 megawatts. That's a lot. So if we go to slide 29 here, this is a good breaking point also. Any questions, Kathy?
Not right now, Nancy.
Okay. Soldier on here, folks, and thank you for listening to all this detailed stuff. Okay, so slide 29, rising fuel costs, how much risk? And let's go to slide 30. So this is a wild chart. And you can see going back to 1997, all of these jumps, right? And as Kathy pointed out, Kathy Buckley, you can see that, you can see one of those peaks. There's not an indicator there, but that's Katrina. So you can see in late 2005, that giant jump was Katrina. Now, there's been different times across the country when power plant costs have jumped relative to the location. So when I say Henry Hub natural gas spot prices, what I mean is down there in Louisiana, which is where the Henry Hub is, that's how much gas costs you on the spot market. Well, what's the spot market? That means today or maybe a few months from now. Because what utilities try to do is they try to buy gas in advance when it's cheap, but you can't always do that. And traditionally, when it comes to fuel, utilities could get coal contracts that were 10 years in the future because there's a lot of coal. But natural gas contracts are short term. They're always short term. I don't know if I've ever seen one that was longer than like 2 years, unless it was part of legislation in a state that had a lot of natural gas like Colorado. But basically, we don't have natural gas in North Carolina. In fact, that's why they want to build an LNG storage place in Lumberton, because we don't have it. We don't produce it here. It comes from somewhere else. So to get back to this chart here, you can see that it takes big jumps. Okay, let's go to the far right here and look at right before 2021. Look how low that cost got. So during the pandemic, the cost of natural gas went down, till it was under $2 a million BTU, which is also very unusual. So there it was, under $2 a million BTU, and then boom, we hit February 2021, And you can see between March 2nd, 2021, when it was $2.87 a million BTU, and then a few weeks, and then February, it was $23.86 a million BTU. Why? Because of the Texas outage. So though that week of when it was so cold in Texas, if you tried to buy natural gas in the open market, you were going to be paying, many multiples of the normal price. Okay, and here's the other thing to remember about fuel. Fuel costs are a pass-through for utilities. What does that mean? That means they just take the cost of fuel and they charge you. They don't make a 10% rate of return, but that means all the risk is on the ratepayers. So when we talk about fuel and when we talk about natural gas, we're talking about risk, two major types of risk. One, fuel costs going up. Two, stranded assets. In other words, the fuel cost is so high, you can't run the power plant. So let's go to slide 31 here. And I want to show you this because this again is from EIA. You can see the little EIA symbol in the bottom left. And so the EIA recognizes here, you can see 2021, look at that giant spike, slide 31. There's that giant spike from February, right? Well, then it went down. Okay, but now it's going back up again. And if you looked it up today, what is the Henry Hub cost of natural gas? I think it's about $5.50. Last I looked, maybe it was $5.80, something like that. So, but look at the EIA. They always have these rosy figures for, unlimited supplies of fossil fuels, unlimited building of natural gas plants, unlimited, all these fuel costs are going to stay low forever. It's an art, and there's a whole subclass of consultants who get hired to refute the EIA's forward prices. I know because I know some folks who have done that for a living. Okay, so let's look at the forward price. In other words, what they're guessing it's going to cost in 2022. And you can see, they say it's going to stay high for a while, but then it's going to magically go down again. Here's why that's more unlikely than usual to happen. Because it used to be that natural gas was a resource that was used in the winter. It was a winter resource for heat. But now, because so much of our electrical generating power plants run on natural gas, that isn't true anymore. And so it's not true anymore that our natural gas is the most expensive in the winter. No, it's also expensive in the summer because we have so many natural gas power plants, right? Okay, so slide 32 here, I wanted to show you a couple things that the cost of all fossil fuels are up sharply. And I want you to notice something. Look at the top right here of slide 32. And it's basically an EU price, okay? So this is a Europe natural gas spot price, the orange. Look how high that is. $40 a million BTU in US costs. $40. That's enough to make most people who do this work for a living your hair to stand on end. So we've been paying about $2.50 a million BTU. And this, most of the time in the last 8 years, this is $40 in Europe. Okay, so let's look at Asia. Asia is almost as high. They're at 35. Why? Because all that gas is imported as LNG. And we'll do a brief dive into LNG to explain to you why LNG is so expensive. But basically, look at those prices for North Asia. And no one really sees those prices coming down much this winter. And then you can see, look at the Henry Hub there, the blue. There again, there's that giant spike in February. There's that Texas power outage and freeze event, right? So I want to mention something else about the difference between oil and natural gas that's really important. Oil is very fungible. What's that mean? It means that you don't have to babysit it. You don't have to chill it. You don't have to, keep it at a certain temperature or pressure. No, you just stick it in a barrel. It doesn't matter how cold it is outside. You put it in a boat and you ship it. So it's very fungible. You can get it from point A to point B without doing too much to it. That is totally not true with natural gas. Why? Because you're taking gas and you're turning it into a liquid, and then you're sending it somewhere, and then you're regasifying it. So it's not as fungible. It takes a lot of care and feeding. Okay, let's look at the next slide here, 33, because I want to show you something about how climate affects natural gas production. Look at these hurricanes. And as Kathy pointed out, they don't have Katrina in there, but I'm sure Katrina shut stuff down too. Because what really strikes me about this is, look at all these hurricanes. They're just in the last decade, right? And what's interesting to me about Ida also is that, you know, it had a big effect. It had a huge effect. And I think it looks like the biggest effect was Isaac in 2012 in shutting down natural gas production. So slide 34 here, this is something to watch because US heating bills are going to jump. They're going to really jump. And I took the slide out, but I've got it in another version of this that I'm going to post with a whole bunch of slides we didn't have time for. And basically, the point I wanted to make is, when you have parts of the country, like let's just say the Midwest, they don't have any natural gas production. They're very far from Texas. They're very far from Pennsylvania. They're very far from where the natural gas is produced, the fossil gas. Their bills are going to go up even higher. So natural gas, the amount of money that you pay changes depending on where you are in the country. But what they found on average is that people's natural gas bills are going to double. So let's go to slide 35, because this is some really good news when it comes to all this stuff. This was done around 2014. It was right after it happened. I remember getting this around 2014, this slide. And it was done by an analyst at AWEA, and that is the American Wind Energy Association, which has now changed its name. There's a link in the speaker's notes, and here's what just gobsmacked me. I remember this cold wave. It was in early January 2014, and it was in the Northeast. And basically, if you look at the black, that is where fuel was not used because wind supplied the electricity in the PJM market. That's a whole bunch of states up north of us. In 2014, over those few days, and look at that, wind saved $1 billion in fuel costs over only 3 days. 3 days. And here's where I want to mention something that's worthwhile for anybody who operates in the regulatory space, is that the utilities will not give credit a lot of times for the fact that clean energy is permanently displacing fuel costs, permanently. So this is something that we need to talk about more, because not only are fuel costs volatile, and not only is fuel polluting, but when we use larger and larger amounts of clean energy, we're going to save on fuel. And if we're looking at across the country, we spend about $80 to $100 billion on a year on fuel. That's a lot of money. Okay, so let's go to slide 36 here. Any questions, Kathy?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. So let's dive into fossil power plants. And I had way too many slides here at first, and I took a bunch of them out because I don't want to confuse people. But slide 37 here. First of all, let's start again with North Carolina's fuel mix. And I'm sorry, the one on the left is a little hard to see, but it's surprisingly difficult to find information sometimes about this stuff. That's why we need the EIA to do this stuff for us. Them to keep good numbers and good data and easily accessible data. Okay, so on the left here, I've got the link in the speaker's notes. It's from an NPR article in 2015, and it shows how the fuel mix changed in every state from 2004 to 2014 in a very straightforward way. I love it. So look at North Carolina in 2004. We were 61% coal. And as of 2014, 39% coal. Well, right now in 2020, as you can see on the right, well, this last year it was 14.9% coal. Let's just say 15% coal, although it's probably going up a little bit in 2021, again, because of the cost of coal being cheaper than natural gas. But setting that aside, you can see just how fast this dropped. So basically from 2004 until 2020, the amount of coal burned in North Carolina went from 61% of total electricity generated down to 15. We can do this, folks. And then look at nuclear. It stayed the same. And that's going to be true because we're not shutting down nuclear plants in North Carolina, not yet. And because nuclear basically runs 93% of the hours in a year, almost all the time, almost in every state. The other thing to note is that natural gas. So look, in 2004, natural gas was only 2%. 2%, that's not much. And then in 2014, it was up to 23. Well, now look at North Carolina in 2020, it was 34. And I believe it's gone even higher to even up to 40. And this is where it changes month to month. And that's why we need good yearly data, because in the world of power plants, the electricity mix changes month to month, changes season to season. I asked the utility guy, the guy who runs my utility that I knew Everlight and Power, can you please give me the data for the last couple of years? And he said, oh, I can't give you that because it changes every month. Well, of course it changes every month, but you can give me the yearly data, and the yearly data is going to tell you basically what you need to know. So basically, you can see in this slide that the energy mix has changed rapidly, and indeed it can change rapidly again. So slide 38 here, this is where this is NPR, the North Carolina Public Radio Station map of coal ash sites and with coal ash plants that are still operating. So you can see where they are. I'm not going to go too far into that, except to note that there are some plants that are incredibly old and incredibly dirty. Belews Creek, Roxborough, Mayo, let's see what else. If anybody else wants to jump in here. Marshall, very old. Okay, and then the next slide, 39. If you've never gone to the Duke Energy website, there's the link. And here's the thing about the link. I wish that they would give you aggregated data, but they don't. You kind of have to click through for every single power plant, which I've mostly done over the last couple of years. But basically, you can get information on the power plant. How old is it? When was it built? What's the emissions profile? Has it been changed to run on natural gas? Was it shut down? If so, what year, etc. And reach out to me if you want some data on any specific plant that I can, and I'm happy to share that. So let's go to slide 40. And I remember seeing this when maybe it was a year ago. And EIA basically jumped, the number of coal to gas conversions jumped over a very specific amount of time. You can see it, 2011 to 2019. And this is where North Carolina has a lot of those coal to gas conversions, and look how big they are. Those are big power plants. And again, they did it with no evidentiary hearing, no input from the community, no input from the 10 million people who are going to be stuck with that electricity for the next 30 years. Because when they make these coal to gas conversions, they're expecting them to run a long time. In fact, here's something else to note, and that I remember from looking at some of these specific coal to gas conversions. And that is that they converted some plants, even though they were going to shut them down in 10 years. So what's the point of converting a power plant if you're going to shut it down in 10 years? So these secretive proceedings, these permits that are just given by default on power plants that are 50 years old I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's moral. I don't think that's at all in our interest. So the other thing that this article pointed out, and there's the link to it right there, is that in the process of converting these coal plants, the amount of megawatts of natural gas that replaced these was double the amount of coal, double. That's also terrible. That's a way to just get more power plants built without having to have hearings. Now, I don't know how they handled it in other states. I don't know if they had hearings or not. I'm going to guess they didn't. But that's a good question. Okay, so let's get now to different types of power plants. Okay, so let's go here to, let's stay here in 40.
Nancy, if I could just, one clarification question.
Yeah.
Is it true that Duke Energy can convert coal plants to natural gas without even asking permission from the North Carolina Utilities Commission?
Yes, that's how they interpret it. Okay, so there's a rule, and Duke Energy interpreted the rule that way. The North Carolina Utilities Commission has the authority, I believe, to say, no, you can't do that. And NC Warren and CBD sued on this issue. Okay, and I'll find the link and stick it in the chat box, or Kathy, maybe you could find it. If you Google just NC Warren and dual fuel and lawsuit, and basically what they said was in the lawsuit is that according to the rules that, as NC Warren and the Center for Biological Diversity read it, they said because the capacity of the power plant changed, because there were major modifications, some language like that, they need a permit. And the North Carolina Utilities Commission said, no, they don't. So basically, this is an interesting issue. And I don't have the last word on it, but I would say that I agree with NC Warren and Center for Biological Diversity that when you're talking about literally thousands and thousands of megawatts, and you're talking about converting a 50-year-old coal plant to run on natural gas, and according to engineers, when you convert that coal plant, it is less efficient. It loses 3 to 5% efficiency. So let's walk through this, okay? You have a coal plant, and it's not that efficient. It's about maybe 34% efficient. So what that means is 34% of the energy embodied in that coal gets turned into work, which is electricity. So 66% of it is just heat, climate change, pollution, stuff we don't want. So when they take that coal plant and then they convert it to gas, the plant is less efficient because of the inherent inefficiencies in using a 50-plus-year-old shell to then stick natural gas infrastructure into. And so basically, I think that based on the fact that it's less efficient, based on the fact that in many cases, the amount of capacity was changed, I agree with CBD and NC Warren. Those permits should not have been given. And I would even say that in the years that those power plants were allowed to do that, there just weren't a lot of people paying attention, and that the utility knew that, and that they just slid it right in there. So I want to explain a little bit more the difference between combined cycle power plants and combustion turbine power plants, okay? Some of the conversions in North Carolina were CCs, combined cycle, and some were CTs or peakers, that's combustion turbine or peakers. And so again, the combined cycle power plants are the ones that are much more efficient because you're capturing the waste heat. And those run a lot more hours in the year. Average in North Carolina is going up. It's about 80% last I looked. So those combined cycle power plants are running a lot. Whereas the peakers are not running much, 1 to 5% of the hours in a year. And so here's another argument, okay, that if Duke Energy is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes many hundreds of millions of dollars, into converting an old peaker so that it can run, converting an old coal plant into a peaker, that's pretty bad. And one of the other arguments that NC Warren made in one of its filings, and the engineer was Bill Powers, is that Duke Energy has other cleaner power plants that it's not running so that they can justify the expense of converting these dirty old coal plants that are now gas plants so that they can justify spending that money. And that is where, if we don't have transparency and we don't have process, we lose. We lose over and over, and consumers lose, customers lose, because unfortunately, unless we have an open process where we can really look at these costs, we don't really even know, because the amount of information given is just pathetically small. It's pathetically low. So I also want to mention one other thing. There's this thing called steam plants, and we have a lot, again, because we have a lot of really old power plants. We're an old state. We've been here a long time, you know, and the steam plants are really bad. They are really inefficient and they are very polluting. And if I had my wish list, I would have a workshop that said, look, let's look at all the steam plants. Then let's look at all the converted plants. And then let's look at the new plants and let's compare them apples to apples. Okay. And let me tell you a little story that shows you just how this plays out in the real world. The Sierra Club hired me to answer the question, why is independent power producer NTE Energy, why are they beating Duke in North Carolina in selling electricity to small utilities, co-ops, and munis? And in fact, my co-op, my utility is one of them. It's New River Light and Power, which is an odd bird because it's a state-owned utility owned by the university. So it's a little bit of an odd duck. But New River Light and Power signed a contract with NTE Energy so that starting in January 1st of 2022, just a month and a half away, instead of buying electricity from Bremco, Blue Ridge Electric Membership Co-op, which buys it from Duke, they are instead going to buy it from NTE. And so the question is why? Well, because it's cheaper. How much cheaper? 30% to 50% cheaper. What? That's a lot. Why? Why? Because NTE's gas plants are much more efficient, right? So if they're more efficient, they need less fuel. And so the NTE Kings Mountain natural gas plant, which, you know, I'm not trying to push it. I don't believe in fossil gas. I think we need to reduce it, but it's so much more efficient than the Duke Energy power plants that NTE was able to sell to North Carolina munis and co-ops 500 megawatts worth of electricity from natural gas combined cycle from that NTE Kings Mountain plant. So that is a shining example of what it means on the ground when you've got a much more efficient plant. Now, again, the reason why this matters so much is because basically when I talk about the fight ahead, I mean, basically what we're talking about is clean energy beating natural gas. That is the fight that we have in front of us. Okay, so let's go to slide 41 here, Andrew. And I want to mention LNG. Okay, and then slide 42. What is it? Okay, LNG, liquefied natural gas. What is it? Well, again, you take a gas and you chill it to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere between 240 and 260. That takes a lot of energy. And why do you do that? You do that so that you can turn it into a liquid and you reduce its volume to 1/600th of its original volume. So in order for it to remain in that liquid state, right, you have to keep it cool. You have to have special infrastructure that keeps it cold, because if you don't, it will explode. It will become a gas again. As it warms, it will expand, and it will expand and expand and expand until it blows up whatever's keeping it in the container. The other thing to remember is that LNG terminals are some of the most expensive infrastructure projects ever built. And if you want to see something wild, Google the 10 most expensive projects in the world. And literally 8 of the 10 are LNG terminals. And they range in price from $5 billion to $120 billion. Okay. $120 billion. That is a lot of money. Those are the ones that are in Australia. We just, FERC approved one and it opened up in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area. And if you look, if you know where Baltimore is, there in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a giant LNG terminal there. Well, what if it explodes? It will be horrible for the town of Baltimore. So I want to explain something else about LNG. Next slide, 43, Andrew. That's the picture of an LNG boat. They are absolutely giant. They are huge. Because you are taking a gas, right, that you fracked. If you're taking it from the United States, it's fracked, right? And so you've got all that leakage from the time the frack gas goes to the LNG terminal, lots of leakage. Then they turn the gas into a liquid and they stick it in the boat. There's probably more leakage there. They apply a lot of energy to chill it to minus 240 degrees Fahrenheit and stick it in that boat so that it's 1/600th of its volume, right? And then that boat uses a fair amount of that LNG on board. I believe it's about 7%, to keep that gas chilled to minus 240 degrees Fahrenheit while they take that boat and send it across the ocean over to, let's just say, Japan. And then in Japan, or wherever it ends up, Korea, China, Japan, there's something called a regasification terminal. That's another very expensive infrastructure. And basically, it takes that gas and turns it from a liquid back into a gas so that it can be piped out and used. So slide 44 is very, it's interesting because I dug around to try to find some up-to-date information on this. And honestly, it was pretty hard to find. Because it costs money to do that, right? It costs money to liquefy, to ship, and to regasify the LNG. Now, this is an MIT study, and in the speaker's note is the link. And basically, they say that the cost to liquefy, ship, and regasify LNG is about $4.10 a million BTU. Now, I've seen costs as low as $1, and I've seen costs as high as $5 or $6. Nonetheless, it definitely costs something. So basically, we could be in a situation in North America that Australia found itself in a few years ago. And that is where they had contracts, the country of Australia, they shipped their LNG to Japan, and they charged people in Japan less than they were charging the people in Australia. So the people of Australia were not very happy. Okay, I'm going to speed it up here a little bit. Slide 45, because as probably many people in this call know, Piedmont is constructing a $250 million LNG facility in Lumberton. And of course, it's going to get chilled, use all that energy, compress it, and stick it in that storage unit as a liquid. Now, I also want to mention something that is key if we actually want real change. And that is that in 2005, when George Bush Jr. was president, they undid antitrust provisions that applied to the electric utility industry. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that means that it used to be, just like we had a big kerfuffle about it in the 80s, where you couldn't have one media outlet own everything. They own the TV station, they own the newspaper, they own the podcast, they own everything. That's antitrust. We had the same thing with electricity, but in 2005, the Republican administration undid it. And so that is why Duke Energy can own everything. They can own the gas company, they can own the power plant, they can own the pipeline. That's antitrust, and that's something that needs to change, bigger picture. So let's go to 46 here and go through LCOE. What is levelized cost of electricity? Slide 47. Okay, what's included and what's not included? Basically, the levelized cost of electricity is what does it cost to generate electricity, taking into account all the costs and dividing it by how much electricity we expect to get. So you've got some really interesting assumptions in there, like what's the total cost to run the power plant over 30 years? How many years is it going to run? 20, 30, 25, 35? How much is fuel going to cost? Well, nobody really knows what fuel is going to cost, right? The power plant O&M and pollution control and labor, those are more stable costs that are known. Fuel is totally unknown, really. And then, of course, also with the IOUs, you've got executive compensation, which is very high, and a 10% profit margin. Okay, here's what we don't include. These are all the things that we want. We want our electricity system to recognize all of these terrible things that come from fossil fuels, right? And then I've got highlighted in yellow, jobs and health benefits, jobs and health benefits. Jobs, we're going to go into more detail in the next time. So slide 48, Joel suggested I find this slide, and it's a lot easier to see. It's from Wikipedia. And basically you can see, I want to show you something there. See the yellow solar panels? Look at how far that thing has dropped. The cost of solar is just dropped and dropped and dropped, right? And so basically, you know, we've got an LCOE for solar that has literally, you know, in 2008, it was many multiples of the cost of natural gas or coal, right? Now it's cheaper. So let's go on to slide 49. And I've got a couple slides I want to show you just as a teaser for next time, because we really are in a new paradigm. So slide 50. The solar is now the cheapest electricity in history, confirms the IEA. Well, what's the IEA? So it's confusing, but the EIA is the Energy Information Administration. That's the US. It's the US, and it's a subset of the US Department of Energy. The IEA is the International Energy Administration or agency. And they obviously are international. There's a very famous guy that runs it named Fatih Birol, Fatihbirol. He is famous because he's always been very plain talking. He's always recognized the danger from fossil fuels and the fact that they're going to run out, whereas the US DOE really didn't. And so this article from the IEA is remarkable. And if we look at slide 51, I took out the chart from that article that the link is in the slide before, slide 50. So slide 51, I just wrote it up there at the top. Utility scale solar is 3 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour in the US and the EU, 2 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour in China and India due to subsidies. And then you can see on the right there, the cost of coal, combined cycle gas turbine, and coal supercritical, which is sort of this fantasy type of coal that nobody ever really built, but it was like super clean, super duper duper coal. So let's go to slide 52, because this is from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Labs. And I wanted to show you this because it made me so excited. because this is the difference in price in only 1 year. Okay, folks, check this out. Residential PV went down 3.2% in 1 year. Okay, from $2.74 in installed $2.40 a cost per watt to $2.65. Now, commercial went down over 10% in 1 year. Utility scale went down 12% in 1 year. Here's what I want you to remember from this slide. The commercial sector of the solar industry in our country is non-existent practically because utilities have killed it. They've done such a great job killing it. This is a type of solar that is, first of all, it can be located close to load, right? Put it on Walmart, put it on the stores downtown, put it on parking garages, put it anywhere you can put it. But it's a big enough scale so that the cost is low. And when you have that size of solar at a commercial size, that's the community solar size. That's the community-owned community solar size, even utility-owned community solar size. So that because of its size, it's cheaper than residential. And it's also located close to load. Okay, let's go to 51 here. And this is the same article I showed before because I just wanted to show you again that battery is cheaper to firm renewables. And we'll go into that more in depth in the next session when it's just pure renewables, except I might do some waste to energy just so people know what that's about. So slide 54, please, Andrew, that is from Lazard. And Lazard is like the gold, standard in the cost of electricity. And they used to cost a lot of money to get those, but now it's just free. It's open to anybody, just Google it and there's the link. And basically what they're looking at is, if you look up here, the unsubsidized solar PV levelized cost of electricity. That means no federal subsidy, no state subsidy, nothing, unsubsidized, right? And you can see down there that it's between $31 and $42 a megawatt hour, which means 3.1 to 4.2 cents a kilowatt hour, right? And then the next slide, 55, that's wind. I'm not sure what they did here with wind, if they mixed offshore and onshore, but we will take a deeper dive into that next session. And we also are going to take a good look at that because North Carolina, we have so much offshore wind potential, just a staggering amount. So slide 56, what does this mean? And I'll just go through this really quickly. Sorry, I'm going to go a couple minutes over. Coal, what do we do? Slide 57. It should be dead. It's still walking around. Let's get rid of it. It's immoral. It's racist. It's terrible. And it needs to go. And I know the Duke, I think it was the last IRP said they would shut their last coal plant down in 2048. They brought a coal plant online in 2012, Duke Energy did. That, I would go ahead and say that's not moral. That is not a moral thing to do, bring a brand new coal plant online in 2012, when they knew darn well the connection between coal and climate change and externalities. So slide 58 here, fossil gas. This is more complicated, but I want to emphasize again, all of these conversions with no hearings, no ability to weigh in, et cetera. They're twice as bad for the climate as coal due to the highly reactive methane. And that's in the IPCC's fourth assessment called the AR4 Assessment Report 4. And then one of the things where I think we're really going to make some headway on our arguments is that these plants are risky. Prices are skyrocketing for fuel. And what if those assets are stranded? And then LNG is not the answer. So slide 59, what do we need? Transparency, process, inclusivity, make sure environmental and health damages are counted, and that people matter, not just utility profits. And I forgot to put in jobs, because basically so many more jobs with clean energy. Okay, slide 60 here, my 1 minute over, yes. Are there any questions? right now, I want to say thank you again to Clean Air NC, to Andrew and June and Kelly and all their team, and the Sierra Club, Dave Rogers, Will Harlan, who's gone now, and Melissa Williams. So any questions?
There are none. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Okay, well, let's see. Yeah. So, again, folks have been reaching out to me, and I want to emphasize this to get advocates to help with this. Because if I could go to EIA website right now and just click a few, if they had this available, which they have the data, so they should make it available, we could just do a quick check some boxes, and we could tell you everything that you needed to know about the power plant in your state or your area that you care about. What's it cost to run? How many hours in a year does it run? How much pollution is it emitting? What are the latest pollution upgrades that they did? How many hundreds of millions are they pouring into a 50-year-old coal plant? So that's where it's really important to get transparency on this data. So with that, Kathy, is there anybody else? Anything, Andrew?
No, I'm not seeing any other questions coming across the board.
Okay, well, I want to say thank you to everyone. Again, don't hesitate to reach out. I've been getting great questions. Excuse me. And I thank you so much for caring, for listening, and for helping to make this world a better place. So thank you all.
Thank you.